I'm Harold Cox. I'm the Associate Dean for Public Health Practice here at the Boston University School of Public Health. And I am so very glad that all of you are able to be here today for this very important program. Our school sits right here in the middle of the South End, Roxbury, Dorchester, South Boston, and it becomes incredibly important for us to actually address issues that are important to the people who are part of our community, as well as people who are part of our larger community of Boston, as well as the state and the country and the world. And at Boston University School of Public Health, we're concerned about all of those pieces. Today's conversation about CORI is an incredibly important one for us as we think about the needs of many individuals. Many of you here are people who are either directly involved with CORIs, who are concerned about CORIs, or who just have some interest in it. But for whatever reasons that you are here or what your interests are, I'm very glad that you are here today. We have an opportunity to actually learn more about what CORI is. We have an opportunity to think about what some of the issues are, as well as to think about what are some of the things that are being done and some of the things that need to be done. So we will hear from panelists, we will hear from experts, and then we will hear from all of you as experts and as concerned people. So thank you very much for being here. I'd also like to invite you, when you are through, to mill about and visit the poster sessions. Each of our students is responsible for doing an internship, and as part of their culminating experience, they have an opportunity to provide a poster. So there are posters out here and on the side as well, and I would certainly invite you to participate and to see those so you can learn about other kinds of activities that our students are actively involved in as we attempt to make a difference in the world as public health professionals. So thank you very much for being here. I would like to now continue with our welcome with our Associate Dean for Education, Dr. Lisa Sullivan. Dean Sullivan.
Good morning. I'd also like to welcome you here to the School of Public Health. I'm Lisa Sullivan, Associate Dean for Education and Professor and Chair of Biostatistics here at the school. I'd like to thank Harold and his team for organizing this outstanding event. The panelists, I'm sure, will engage us in a conversation that we'll probably never forget. So thank you for all of your efforts in getting the panelists together and for all of you for being here this morning. On behalf of our school, our educational program is strengthened by your involvement, and on behalf of our faculty and students, I want to thank you for that. I hope this event is one of many that we can work together to deal with health problems in our community. This is such an important issue that affects the lives of so many. And I want to thank you all for attending, and I hope, again, as Harold said, you can stay for the posters. These presentations that are demonstrated on the posters that are around this room are involvement of our students with many of you in this room. So thank you for that, and for those of you who haven't yet been involved, we hope you can become involved with us, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to invite Barbara Ferrer, who is the Executive Director of the Public Health Commission here in Boston, to come and help set the stage for us. For each of our presenters, there is biographical information about them, and for each of them, we could have written long, voluminous amounts of information about them. We gave you short snippets, and I'm going to invite you to read those. The thing that I would say about Barbara is that she's concerned, and that she's someone who cares, and we're very glad that she's able to be here. Barbara?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here. You know, I'm really honored to actually be asked to give remarks, but I want to start by saying that I look around the room and I see so many people who are definitely more qualified than me to stand up here and talk about the importance of working around reforming our CORI system. Because I look around and I see people in this room who are either have lived through the horrors of being caught up in the CORI system, or have dedicated a good portion of both their professional and personal life to trying to make changes in this system over many years. So I want to say it's an honor to be asked to come and talk when there are so many in the room who have been so intimately involved in a fight to reform a system that really does more harm than good both to the individuals who are tied up in the CORI system as well as to the rest of us who live in communities across the state. But I was asked to give a few brief remarks about sort of, what is the CORI system and what are the issues for us in public health. So I'm going to try to just highlight a few things that I think are important for us to keep in mind as we go through the day, and most particularly to keep in mind as we think about what we need to do to reform the system. So for those of you who don't know, CORI is the state criminal offender record information system. It was actually created to streamline information sharing between law enforcement folks and outside parties who needed to know on a public safety basis some information about folks who had charges against them that would impact their ability to do work. But since the system started, those people who are able to actually access records has greatly expanded, and now on an annual basis about 1.5 million records are released each year in Massachusetts by the Criminal History Systems Board, 1.5 million records. Many of the people who are accessing the system or getting information out of the system actually have very little training about how to read these records. There's no requirement that you go through a training process in order to figure out exactly what the information is that you're getting, and you're actually getting complex information that can often be confusing in terms of both the status of somebody's criminal record. So you've got cases that are pending, you've got charges that are pending, all tied in with people who have actually had convictions. So oftentimes this isn't an easy thing to figure out actually what the information is that you're getting in the first place. Lots of people end up, based on information that a prospective employer might get or somebody who's checking on your ability to stay in certain kinds of housing, based on information that they're getting back from sort of the CORI system, they will make a determination that may in fact end up denying somebody housing or jobs or educational opportunities based on crimes that may have been committed many, many years ago, or in fact on crimes for which a person was never convicted. So we've got decisions that are getting made about education, housing, and jobs based on information that may have happened 15, 20 years ago, as well as information that actually never led to a conviction. While people who have a criminal offender record in this system come from, across the board in terms of their age, their gender, their race, their socioeconomic backgrounds, due to some complex and long-standing social policies and disparate sentencing that happens within our court system, young men of color are disproportionately affected when you think about a criminal record review system. And if you look at the 2000 census, which of course is the latest census that we use, blacks constituted about 5.5% of the population in Massachusetts, but they were over 26% of the incarcerated population across the state. And similarly, Latinos were about 7% of the Massachusetts population, but they make up over 26% of the incarcerated population. And of course, the numbers are significantly higher if you look at the proportions for Boston residents. This disparity is profound across the board, but it's most profound if you look at what happens in terms of convictions between black and white men for drug-related charges, where nationwide, so it's not just in Massachusetts, but nationwide, men who are convicted for drug crimes, if they're black, they have a 13 times greater chance of having a drug conviction than a white person who's arrested on similar charges. So, when we look, we could talk for the entire hour about sort of conviction rates and arrest rates. But particularly around drug charges, we see a profound difference across the nation and in Massachusetts around who's getting convicted and under what charges. And we're not going to have time to go through that, but I think it's important to keep in mind that part of the reason why CORI so disproportionately is affecting black men of color and Latinos of color in Massachusetts and in Boston is because we have a criminal justice system that, in fact, is mirroring some long-standing issues, racism, institutional racism, and policies that, in fact, continue to drive a disparity in both arrests and convictions. So why a public health issue? Because many people have looked at this in the past and said, employment, perhaps, people around fair employment policy should get involved. People who are involved in criminal justice should be getting involved. People in fair housing have gotten involved in this issue. So why public health? And I think it is fundamentally a huge public health issue. And I'm going to talk for a second about the issue of disparities, which I think we've all paid a lot of attention to. So inequities in health outcomes, something we know a lot about in the city of Boston, where black babies in 2006 are still dying 4 times the rate of white babies, and at a rate in 2006 that's higher than the rate white babies died at 30 years ago. We also know that in the city of Boston, black men live on average 6 years less than white men, and black women live on average 4 years less than white women. And we can look at just about any health outcome and find a tremendous gap. And it's this gap that's most challenging and most worrisome, I think, for anybody who's doing public health work. And I think the issue of, sort of the way the CORI system is working right now is it's both demonstrating an inequity, but the inequity that it actually then creates is fueling the inequities we see in health. Because when you think about it, the issue of access to jobs and access to housing and access to education are fundamental issues that need to get addressed in order for somebody to be healthy. If you don't have a job, you don't have access to good and affordable housing, and you don't have access to educational opportunities, you are much more likely to have poor health outcomes. So for me, when I think about sort of our struggle to eliminate disparities in health outcomes, I can't see how we could do that work without also including in that important work around CORI reform. Because the way the CORI system is working right now, it is actually limiting the ability of people to get jobs, housing, and educational opportunities. The other reason why I think it fundamentally needs to be an issue that those of us in public health pay a lot of attention to is if you look at why people are getting incarcerated, you can actually see that probably about 80% of the incarcerations could be related to untreated addiction or mental illness. So we have a whole host of folks who are serving time for health issues. Straight out health issues, addiction, mental illness. And there again cries out for a health response as opposed to just a criminal justice response. We're locking up a lot of people whose real, sort of the cause of their crime or criminal behavior is definitely linked to untreated mental illness and addictions that they haven't been able to pay attention to and to resolve. And those are for us public health issues. Sort of making sure that we actually get those services to people who need them in time for them to either put their lives back together or, most importantly, keep their lives from spiraling out of control is in fact the job of many of us in the room. Make sure those services are available, make sure people are linked to those services. But also know that when people have served their time, many of them come out with the same problems they went into in terms of their health issues. And now it's compounded by their inability, again, to have good access to housing, jobs, and educational opportunities, which then again limits their access to health services. In this country, the easiest way to get health services is if you're employed. Okay, so even with health reform, it still remains the easiest way to get access to good health services. So for me, it keeps coming back to there is a role for public health. We need to pay attention to this issue. We need to be strong advocates for this issue. We need to stand up for sort of what is fundamentally an unjust system that actually perpetuates both these long-standing inequities in health outcomes, but also perpetuates the inability for people to move into recovery, put their lives back together, and get a second chance. You know, many people commit a crime, and the way we've set the system up, when they're done doing their time, they start a whole new sentence. And that sentence, again, I think is something that, in fact, is leading to serious gaps in health. You know, it's what motivates us at the health department to get involved, and I'm sure it's what motivates most people in the room to get involved. So in closing, the only other issue I thought was important to highlight, you know, from a public health perspective that we sometimes don't think about is the impact that CORI also has on our ability to hire the most qualified people for the job. Because in fact, I would say for those of us who are setting up systems of care that work with people who are in recovery or trying to get into recovery, those of us who are working with victims of violence and perpetrators of violence, in fact, it is really important that we are able to employ folks in these areas that, in fact, have experienced some of these issues themselves. And, you know, the way the CORI system is set up now, we, in fact, end up being very limited in our ability to employ the people who I would say would make excellent employees in this work because of this, you know, sort of burdensome and unfair system that then limits their ability to be productive and limits our ability to run excellent programs. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel, and thank you both, Harold and Lisa, for inviting us here today.
A program like this one is incredibly important for us to think about all the aspects of CORI, and we can certainly talk about it from many different aspects of the legal issues, the theoretical issues, and such like. But it really is something that impacts individual people. So it's just as important for us to actually hear from people who are directly involved and who have been directly impacted. And I'd like to invite Minister Hannibal Williams to actually come up and share with us his story. And he'll tell you how it's impacted him. Minister Williams.
Good morning to all of you. My name is Hannibal A. Williams, Jr. I am the son of Dr. Hannibal Williams, Sr., who was a community organizer and founding pastor of the New Liberation Presbyterian Church in San Francisco, California. I grew up being raised in the church, and Christian values were instilled in me, of course, from my birth. I was a straight-A student for most of my life. I learned to play several instruments by the time I was a teenager, and I sang in my church choir all of my life. In spite of this wonderful upbringing, hip-hop culture became a powerful influence on my life. Now, I do not intend to debate the morality of hip-hop music and culture, but I will admit that the music I was listening to did not promote healthy attitudes or lifestyles. At age 18, I picked up my first charges: possession of stolen property. You may be wondering why I was not charged with the actual theft. The reason for this is because I didn't perform the theft. A friend of mine, my homeboy, he performed the theft. I received the item from him. He was caught on film, interrogated by authorities, and promptly directed them to me. I was arrested while at work for a local grocery store. Unfortunately, this would not be the end of my run-ins with the law. For a period of time in my early adult life, I continued to try to live the lifestyle that I was being taught by the music I listened to, the people, and the environment I surrounded myself with. I was making bad choices and turning to crime to solve the resulting financial difficulties. which only encouraged a cycle of negativity and waste in my life. After moving all over the country, I finally settled down in the state of Nevada. It was at this time that I began to seek a change in direction. Rather than try to hustle my way through life looking for quick dollar solutions, I decided to try to work for a living. I had some college education and a high school diploma. Initially, I was able to find a job quickly at a local auto detailing shop. The owner of the shop, Reverend Joshua Devine Sr., intentionally hires people like myself to help us start a new life. While working there, I applied for better, higher-paying jobs. I applied at grocery stores. I applied at hotels and casinos. I applied at warehouses and distribution centers. I applied at call centers and customer care centers. I was hired by none. Why? Because of my background report. Finally, a coworker advised me that I needed to utilize the temp for hire services. So I applied with Manpower. As Providence would have it, the young lady who did the hiring for Manpower was a young lady from one of the local neighborhoods in Reno. She intentionally hid my criminal record from the company. Because of that, she was able to find me a graveyard shift in a local distribution center within a week. I worked there for almost a year. For the next few years, I would work at several different warehouses and distribution centers. I would work hard. I would be commended by management. I would always be offered a permanent position. And then my background check would return and I would be fired. For the next few years, when this began to happen, I started to use other temp for hire positions. Some of them would see my qualifications and offer me positions only to have to withdraw the offer once my background came back. Now, I don't ask for sympathy for the consequences of my bad choices. Please don't misunderstand me. But I simply ask, how long should I have to work at a place that doesn't provide the pay necessary to support a family of 4? Can you feel a little of our frustration picturing myself returning home from work and informing my wife yet again that I have been terminated because my background check was returned? What thoughts do you suppose may have gone through my mind at that time? I admit to you, I thought of stealing. I thought of selling narcotics. I thought of hustling. I thought of returning to the cycle of negativity that caused my problem in the first place. I humbly submit that there are many like me. CORI reform is important because it could be an essential step to breaking this type of cycle. Thanks be to God that my life is different now. But that is only because the people of God became the instruments necessary to cut me out of that cycle. For me, the Christian community is responsible for the change in my lifestyle. But many people like me are not connected to the Christian community. Many of them will not find God while they sit in their jail cell. Let us then consider honestly, does this current system achieve what we as a society really desire? Let us approach it as logically as we may, weighing the balance of pros and cons. And after doing so, let us have the courage and strength to do what must be done for the good of the Commonwealth and the good of the Union. I thank you for this time.
Thank you, Hannibal. I'd like to invite our panelists to come up now. We have invited today a number of people who represent different aspects of this issue to come and to share their perspective with us. We've asked them to talk about how are they connected to this issue and what do they see as being the major challenges in dealing with CORI. All of their bios are in the presentation, in the booklet. However, let me just mention that on our stage we have Sheriff Andrea Cabral, we have who is the sheriff for Suffolk County. We have Tina Brooks, who is the Undersecretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development for Commonwealth. We have Aaron Tanaka, who is the Executive Director of the Boston Workers Alliance. We have Wayne Burton, who is the President of North Shore Community College. And we have Reverend Herman Hamilton, who is the pastor at the Roxbury Presbyterian Church. On our panel, we have a number of individuals who represent law enforcement, housing, and we also have, okay, well, I made a mistake, didn't I? But you're going to hear from Carlotta in just a few moments. Carlotta is also going to share with us her story. So I'm going to introduce her to you in just a moment. Okay, did I reprieve? Is that my reprieve? Okay, am I clear now? All right. Okay, so back to my notes. See, I got this under control. I know what's going on here. At any rate, at our table today, we have individuals who represent law enforcement, housing, education, religion, business. We have individuals who are concerned and who work as government relations in the area of community relations, who understand the legislative process. We have individuals who understand the whole issue of fairness. We have individuals who consider themselves to be advocates, and we have at least one person on the panel who considers themselves to be a troublemaker. So I'm very glad that they're all here to share with all of us their concerns and their issues about this particular issue. I'd like to start with Sheriff Cabral.
Good morning. Good morning. Before I was sheriff, I was a prosecutor for 16 years. So my access to CORI was always in the context of law enforcement. It was always as a prosecutor standing before a judge, looking at, hello, Rasad. I just noticed a former colleague of mine, Rasad Hall, from the DA's office in the audience. It was always standing as a prosecutor in front of a judge, reciting an individual's record or using that record in consideration of sentencing or a plea. And at the time, I think when I was a prosecutor, I didn't really see criminal offender record information as being accessed by anybody except people in law enforcement, and judges, probation officers, police officers, prosecutors, and so forth. The issues for me as sheriff around CORI are pretty different because I have a population of people, not as many as I would like to have, but certainly a core group of people inside the institution who would desperately like to change their lives, and this is one of the issues that sort of stands in their way. But I balance my acknowledgement and recognition, acknowledgement of the fact that people should not have to pay indefinitely, certainly not for a single mistake, but not indefinitely even for perhaps a series of mistakes, against the absolute need for some information to be available. My plea with regard to CORI is for balance, that there be, at whatever point this information becomes available to employers or people who deal with housing who need it because there are issues of risk and safety, that there be an educational program, some mechanism for them to understand what they read. I will tell you, Rasan will confirm this, it takes a good 6 months when you first become a prosecutor before you can actually read a record as a prosecutor because it's written in essentially in a code. I think that that's necessary. I think that for, and it's sad to say this, but for every Hannibal Williams, please keep in mind that within the system, you certainly have people who have made a mistake. You have people who have made a series of relatively minor mistakes, but you absolutely have people who offend again and again and again. I stopped doing drug cases in 1990 because I wasn't particularly happy with the disparities that I saw. But from that point on, every case I did was a case involving the victim, either a community that had been victimized or an individual. And so when we talk about CORI, I just don't want us to look at it in this sort of idealized way that says that everyone is victimized by having a criminal offense. Some people should have that record, and some portions of that record should be available to certain people under certain circumstances. It is absolutely necessary. There are dangerous people out there. That said, I hope that there is a way to create a system that provides fairness and opportunity for people who I think constitutionally deserve it, but want it and want to capitalize on it.
First, I just want to thank Harold and Lisa for inviting me to join the panel this morning. It's for me, I'm focusing on housing, obviously. It's a terrific opportunity to just see what my colleagues are dealing with from different perspectives. The funny thing is, we're all working for the same customer, essentially, just dealing with different aspects of people's lives. I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the housing perspective. I am the Undersecretary for Housing, and part of what I do is manage the Department of Housing and Community Development. We have 55,000 state-assisted public housing units that we support, and we provide subsidies for any number, thousands in Massachusetts, thousands of units of affordable housing subsidized by the state. Much of this housing is impacted by CORI. Basically because property managers, all the site managers that are taking applications from prospective residents have policies that govern how they look at a prospective resident of their rental housing portfolio, whether it's the state-assisted public housing or the private housing, and that's where CORI comes into play. The governor issued an executive order recently, which many of you are familiar with, and it asked all departments across state government to review their policies and programs that touch CORI and to work with the Criminal History Record Board to align our policies and requirements with the goals for CORI reform. We've done that at DHCD. The result is a model policy for these developments in their review of prospective applicants, and that's what I want to just spend a second talking about this morning, just to give you some background on it. Andrea mentioned that one thing she would hope for is balance in the utilization of CORI, and in fact, balance was one of the priorities that we brought to our work in developing the model policy. We thought that it would be important that anyone looking at CORI information really focuses on what information is relevant in the instance of this particular applicant coming to this particular housing unit. We also obviously are concerned about the whole notion of fairness. CORI for us at DHCD, we see it as the new leading edge on fair housing issues. And of course the balance that Andrea referenced before. One other thing that we just wanted to make sure we made clear this morning is that much of the information that comes to site managers, to property managers, may not even be accurate or up to date. So it's incredibly important that we try to press for some standard that requires the information to at least be accurate and up to date. And of course, the information that is relevant to this particular applicant. There may be a record for a John Smith that pops up in a search that isn't actually the John Smith that's sitting before you in the application procedure. Because these things are put together in a code, the easiest thing to do is if a CORI comes back, a CORI record comes back on a particular applicant, just move past that applicant, go on to the next person, because why go through all the trouble of trying to figure out what's in there and if it's accurate or not. So just trying to get people to focus on what's in front of them and to be balanced, fair, and relevant is a huge task in and of itself. I will very quickly go through some of the items that the policy captures, but first I just want to say that the model policy at this moment applies to all of our public housing. It has become the public housing intake standard for the state. It conforms to Chapter 121B and all of DHCD's written policies, and we are in the process now of approaching the private market developers of affordable housing to begin to figure out how to work with them around conforming some of their policies and standards to this new threshold that we've put in place. And the toughest thing is the notion that inevitably some subjective judgments have to be made. And private owners always feel some legal vulnerability when they're being asked to make a subjective judgment about anything, because that creates an exposure for them later on. Now, very, very quickly, I'll just mention the 7 key elements here. We would like some notice to go to applicants if a CORI comes back that is being considered for them. We would like the reviewers of a CORI to receive training so that, I think Andrea touched on this point, so they actually know what they're looking at. We would like to prohibit an automatic disqualification of an applicant if there is a record. We'd like to confirm that the record really is for that particular applicant. We would like to provide the applicant some opportunity to defend themselves and some determination to be made relative to the suitability of the unit for that particular person. Even if you were convicted of shoplifting, for example, is that relevant to your viability as an applicant for a particular unit? If that record has nothing to do with destabilizing the peace and security of the development or the other residents there, should that even come into play in a determination of your application? And then lastly, just that the applicant gets some notice of the determination in a timely manner so they're not just spinning their wheels out there wondering what's going on.
Hello, my name is Aaron Tanaka. I'm with the Boston Workers Alliance. Our organization is a Roxbury-based community group of under and unemployed workers who have criminal records. And so we've been working on the CORI reform campaign for about 3 years, and see a lot of faces around here who've been involved in this pretty long campaign. I think it's really timely that we're here today because I think, as many of you might know, there's been a lot of movement down at the legislature over the last 2 weeks in our efforts to get a bill passed out of committee and through the House. I'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to try to give a little bit of context of how our organization understands the issue of CORI. So first I just want to cite Barbara's opening remarks, recognizing the issue of institutional racism as being a factor in how the criminal justice system operates. For our organization, we understand the CORI really to kind of sit at the intersection of the criminal justice system, institutionalized racism, and the economy, what we would call a post-industrial economy. Specifically, what we're looking at is the way that the labor force and job opportunities have changed in Massachusetts and in the country as a whole. Specifically, we've seen the exportation, for example, of manufacturing labor that used to be popularly held by young men of color. All that work has essentially been exported south into other countries based on globalization, basically. So recognizing that the changes in the labor system has really created a vacuum of work opportunities is really critical, because we understand the CORI as being really a mask to the broader issue of unemployment. So in Roxbury, for example, 50% of young men of color are unemployed. There's about 12 to 14,000 young people who are not in school and not working. And so what we recognize is that even if we're able to fix the CORI system as it stands now, if we're not dealing with the issue of the economy and not dealing with not dealing with unemployment at a fundamental level, a lot of the issues that we're advocating for still are going to be there. But the CORI system really perpetuates and concentrates the problem of racism and unemployment in communities of color. And I think the best statistic that kind of points us to that conclusion is a study done by a professor at Princeton named Divad Pager. And what she did was take white applicants and black applicants and send them out. These were all actors. These were all college students who were actors with the same supposed drug offense. They sent them out, and what they found was that that obviously the CORI, having a criminal record, impacted both white and black applicants. It cut down a white applicant's chance of getting a call back for an interview by 50%, and it cut down a black applicant's chance of getting a call back by 64%. So to start off, we know that it's a real issue. But then when you compare the two cohorts, what we found is that the white applicants without a criminal record, white applicants with a criminal record were actually being called back more than black applicants without a criminal record. It was a tight margin, but it was the black applicants with a record was about 4%. Black applicants without a record was 14%. White applicants without a record was 17%, or with a record, was 17%, and then white applicants without a record was 34%. So what you see here is that the disparities in employment, are really, the CORI system really gives people a trigger to be racist in their hiring, and that's for us one of the fundamental issues that needs to be addressed. And the real impact of this then in terms of a public health perspective, for example, is a concentration of unemployment and poverty creates all kinds of health issues. From an individual perspective, we have lots of people in our organization who are going out, for months and months at a time, putting out 20, 30 applications a month and are getting rejected. And this is from places like Walmart, Blockbuster Video, places that they're perfectly qualified to work for. And if you could imagine kind of the constant rejection that this creates, and also people aren't dumb, they recognize that a lot of it has to do with their race and their appearance. And so, another thing in terms of how in terms of the impact on public health, I was reading that there's been studies done recently on the direct impact of the perception of racism to your actual health. And so this is outside of the issues of poverty and, employment, but actually just the experience of going through racism impacts your heart, impacts your blood pressure, these types of things, creates all kinds of heart disease. And so I don't have anything to do with the medical field, so I'm not going to get too into that. But recognizing that these various issues have real confluence on how people are able to live their lives. And so for us, this has been a major issue, and it's been a real significant issue, especially in Roxbury and Dorchester, where I'm privileged to be able to work. And I think it's manifested by the amount of involvement that people in the community have really given to this issue. In April of last year, our organization with a bunch of other groups organized a 2,000, 3,000 person march from Roxbury all the way down to the State House. I think it's the largest gathering of ex-prisoners to stand up for their own employment. And these people are marching with their families because they want to be able to do the right thing. They want to be able to support their families. And so we know that there's so what we see is a real movement of folks who are interested in maintaining employment opportunities and really being able to turn their life around. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on the specific policy issues that we see going on right now. So first of all, in January, we were really happy to be able to work with Governor Patrick's administration to pass an executive order on CORI. And within that, it was a lot of wrangling, but there were a few things that we were really happy about. One is that there was a requirement for employers who use the Criminal History Systems Board to go through a training to learn how to read the CORI. So some of the issues that Sheriff Cabral brought up earlier in terms of the lack of knowing how to read the CORI, that's actually been instituted and is actually in the process of being kind of rolled out. They're going to have an online testing system. And so that's one of the major victories that we consider we've got in January. Another major thing that I think was being spoken about earlier was a mandate from the executive order to rewrite the Executive Office of Health and Human Service regulations. So these regulations, prior to this executive order, essentially maintained what is called presumptive disqualification for a whole host of people who have criminal offenses. And so, like was described earlier, we believe that people who've gone through substance abuse programs and have gone through recovery can be the strongest role models and workers for people who are going through similar issues. We also think that people who have gone through prison, for example, can be the most powerful advocates in working with youth. But unfortunately, the past Health and Human Service regulations kind of categorically denied people the ability to get into these work opportunities. So what we're seeing is in the next few months there's going to be new regulations being rolled out that really undo a lot of this presumptive disqualification. So we're very pleased about that. There's going to be a public hearing in a few months, and we still have some issues about that, but as a whole, it's a really great step in the right direction. So that's some of the executive order stuff. Finally, I just want to speak really quickly about what's happening with the legislature, because last week, a lot of us in this room actually have been spending a lot of time down at the State House. We finally got a bill reported out of the Judiciary Committee. It's been about 3 to 4 years that we've been trying to push some kind of proposal to come out, and so we're very pleased, although we only have 2 days now to get it through the House and the Senate, and we're not sure if we're going to be able to pull that off. A bunch of us will probably be going back to the State House after this panel to be a presence there. But one of the really great things that we were able to secure in this proposal, in this bill, was what we're called the ban the box proposal, or what we call was effectively removing the criminal record question off of job applications. And this was actually already done by the city of Boston in 2004 and was picked up by Cambridge in 2005. And it's been replicated across the country in a bunch of different cities, San Francisco, Oakland, St. Paul, Chicago, Austin. Boston was the first city to do this. The reasoning basically is to say that right now when you apply for a job and you check off that box, employers, if they see that box, they file you into the trash bin. They don't look at your resume, they don't look at your recommendations, they don't give you an interview. And so what we're dealing with is a high level of upfront discrimination when people check off that box. So our thinking is to move that criminal record inquiry to the end of the process once you decide someone is already qualified for that position. The idea is to give people a chance to let them get their foot in the door and make a case for themselves instead of assuming that they're not qualified to work at your place of employment. So getting this proposal into the bill was a major accomplishment for us, and if it passes, it would impact all employers in the state, and we would be the first state in the country to make such major strides, visible strides for people who are actually looking for employment. And so we're really pleased about that. And then the second thing has to do with reducing the waiting period to seal CORIs. And I think Hannibal kind of spoke about that earlier. How long do I have to wait? Right now it's 15 years for a felony, 10 years for a misdemeanor. And that starts after you wrap up your sentence, mind you. So after you've done your jail time, any probation or parole, then your waiting period starts. We were able to get the governor to put out a proposal that put it at 5 and 10 years. We still think that's a little bit too long, but we're happy to have some types of changes in that area. And one safeguard that I do want to just mention is that, there are people who are, who reoffend repeatedly and who that's a legitimate concern for. One of the things in the sealing laws is that you can't seal your record unless you've gone for that amount of time without recommitting a crime. And so really there's a lot of safeguards involved in the sealing periods that say that you basically have to prove yourself as being able to be a law-abiding citizen for that amount of time. So we think that, really the time period should be reduced even further to about 3 and 7 years based on recidivism statistics. But, at this point we'll take what we can get. And hopefully everybody here is invested in this CORI issue, and you'll let your legislators know that this is something that you care about. So thank you.
I'm Wayne Burton, president of North Shore Community College. We're, I think, the third largest in the Commonwealth with about 15,000 students. We conduct CORI checks on students who have unsupervised contact with children, the disabled, and other populations. As I sit here today, 28 applicants to our allied health programs have positive CORIs come back to the college. What do we do? Some of you are parents, and I would ask you the question, how would you feel if your child became the victim of a healthcare worker in a hospital and you found out that offender was in fact a college student at my school who we knowingly put in that hospital, someone who had a previous record? I don't think the first person you would call is the cops, the next person you'd call is your lawyer, and you would be very critical of me and my college for allowing that to happen. On the other hand, I'll tell you uncategorically, I'm a very strong advocate for CORI reform. As a community college president, we stand for access. We not only stand for first chances, we stand for second chances, third chances. I'm a strong believer in redemption, and I'm a strong believer in that everybody should have the opportunity to succeed. We run programs. One reason I'm here with the Essex County House of Corrections, we have scholarship programs for prisoners who finish their sentence and want to go to college. It's called the Daniel Scholarship. It started with workers who volunteer to work in the jail to work in the ABE program. And it's a tragedy when when people who turn their lives around are released from custody cannot find a job because they don't have the education and have a negative CORI. So we work with them to improve that. The applications for those scholarships will bring tears to your eyes. I mean, it is remarkable. And many of them are single mothers, recovering alcoholics. Many of them are victims of domestic violence. All of them say, for example, I have a strong passion for recovery for my future. I wish to be in college to make a difference by changing myself. I know that education will help me build a new life. A single woman, mother of 2 boys, victim of domestic abuse, a recovering addict. Although it's been an uphill battle, I have learned a lot about myself today. I am living a drug-free life. Today I have hopes and plans and want to be a good role model for my children. The responsibility, it's a very serious matter for us. Up until about 3 months ago, community college was not allowed to conduct their own CORIs. We had to go through third parties. That was actually part of reform, and something I agree with, that we should limit access to CORI activity to only people who are trained to use it. But we applied to get long-term access, and it was granted recently. So we now have a CORI committee at the college made up of the deans of health and others. And so they will go through those 28 CORIs with a highly trained CORI person who understands how to read these records. Now, I've read CORI records, and it is complicated. Those codes, you have to know what they mean, you have to know what you're looking at, you have to know what to look for, and all of the staff that I have that work with CORI have been through very extensive, and it's very good training. I know I've talked to people here about it. And I'm pleased to say that of the 28 students, the initial screening, and I don't look at the records. I don't have access to them, and I don't want access to them. Most of them are violations that do not appear serious. And it's likely those students would not be not allowed to be admitted to the program. And I think that's very important, that human judgment be applied to these records, informed human judgment. However, we will have no choice but to dismiss them from the program if the Executive Office of Health and Human Service Regulations would prohibit them from future employment in the health profession. I don't think it's fair to a person to raise their expectations that if they take an RN program that they'll find employment in that field if we know full well that they won't. And so that's the position we've taken. Now, understand that under the CORI law, as I understand it, we have to provide anyone whose CORI came back with a copy of that CORI. And they have an opportunity to reject, explain, or otherwise say that's not even me, if that's the case. Let me close. By the way, I met the Daniel Scholarship person who won the scholarship this year. She's going on to a 4-year school. Just a remarkable person. And just a model for CORI reform, a woman who was victimized herself and now will contribute to society. Let me close with a paragraph that I wrote for this. Support for CORI reform means hope and opportunity, which is the byword of my college, not just for ex-offenders, but for all of us. Our challenge is a disenfranchised prison population of over 2 million, with 2 million more on probation or awaiting trial. Funding priorities that build prisons instead of schools, and laws that sustain cycles of dysfunction and unemployment. We all share a responsibility to individuals, families, and communities. With a compassion of healing and impetus of social change, North Shore Community College's solution is empowerment through education. Reform of CORI laws will support our commitment to the Don Daniel Scholars. Anything less would deny the birthright of a just and democratic society. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me just say a word of salute to Dr. Cox and Sister Haynes and to Commissioner Ferrer and all who are here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this experience. And I also should point out just before I get started, that Roxbury Presbyterian Church is well represented this morning. Hannibal was on staff, and my brother-in-law at Roxbury Pres, and Aaron was a former intern at Roxbury Presbyterian Church. So we're in the house today. I'm going to solely reduce my remarks to in the role of being a Christian pastor, pastoring a predominantly African-American church in the city. Everybody say redemption. Redemption. Let's say it again, redemption. Redemption. For me, that's the heart of the issue as a pastor as we come to the questions around CORI. It is at the very center of the Christian faith. As a matter of fact, in our church and in our tradition, every Sunday morning, we have a liturgical piece that we call the prayer of confession. And we all, from the pulpit to the back pew, confess our sins, our brokenness. And then there's an assurance of pardon that goes something like this: if you confess your sins, Jesus is faithful and just to forgive you and cleanse you of all unrighteousness. And so then we preach some message, and the message has something to do with redemption. And inevitably, over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of young men of color who will come up and say, okay, Reb, I hear it. I take you serious. I heard the message. They make their own confession. I want to do it right. I just got out. Help me. Tell me what I need to do. All right? First thing you need to do is you got to get a job. Why do I need a job? Of course, they already know why they need a job. In order to make sure that they don't go back and get into a situation where they're going to repeat whatever the offense is. They need a new set of relationships. They need often a new place to live out of the environment in which they were in. They certainly need a job. They need a set of skills, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, you need a job. You need a job. They say, okay, I can't do that without a job. I got to stay where I am till I can do better. All right, need a job. They get housing. Most of them have children. Some of them may have a wife. Need a job to take care of those. Food on the table. Need a job. Basic dignity and a sense of worth that helps them to stand up strong on their own 2 feet, begin to feel their own sense of being a man. Need a job. Okay, Reb, I got it. Need a job. Where do I go? Look, just get the papers. Just hit the streets. There's McDonald's across the street. There's Home Depot. There's Walgreens down the street. Just get out there and start getting out applications. We're going to do it. Let's pray. Pray in the office. Lord, open up a door. Got it. Next week, how you doing? Well, I've submitted these kind of applications. Any blessings? Not yet, but I'm still working on it. Okay, another good sermon, another prayer, great worship. Go back out. Week 2. What's the result? No job. Okay, stay with it. Good sermon, good prayer. Go back out. Week 6. No job. All right, but stay, well, Rabbi, no, the Lord's going to come through for you. Just hang right on there. I know the Lord's going to come through you. Absolutely. 3rd month. Same story. 6th month. Same story. Take into account that this issue of not being able to get employed because they got a record, and of course I'm saying, tell people up front. Tell them up front. We're learning now that that's probably not the best wisdom. Tell them up front. Tell them to give you a chance, so forth. Compounded by educational challenges. They probably had a learning challenge that was never well defined. They probably are a high school dropout. They already have issues around their ability to educate themselves. And now think about this in terms of 13 months and 14 months. Unemployed. Well, inevitably, that young man, the representative of that young man comes back and in basic conversation, after some sermon, after some service, say, well, Reb, I believe that God forgives me. And I've experienced that the church forgives me. About 16 months now. Unemployed. My problem is not that God won't forgive me. It's not that the church won't forgive me. My problem is that the community won't forgive me. See, God forgives me, but he don't have a job for me. The church forgives me, but you ain't got no job for me. I can only get a job from the community, from society. And they keep saying no. Can you imagine how much faith it takes? If you already have a series of challenges, educational, economic, factor in the race piece, but you really got your heart set on getting it right. And you're 17, 18, 20 months out, you still can't get a job. How many of us, actually, if we were in that experience? When you know you can actually go out today and sell some drugs or hustle, and you can take care of business. But I'm going to do it right. 18 months. So I agree that there are folk who are repeat offenders, and we need to make sure that CORI pays attention to that. There needs to be sensible reform. But the vast majority of people that I deal with as a pastor, who I pray with and preach to, and tell them that if they confess their sins, the Lord is faithful and just to forgive them and cleanse them of all unrighteousness, and by implication, live up to the standards of redemption. Thank you.
I'd like to invite now Caroletta Shaw-Boyd to actually come and actually share with us her story about dealing with the issues of CORI. Caroletta. You can actually speak from there. Oh, okay.
Good morning. Good morning. I need to say, first of all, that everything that each panel member has said up here has directly affected me. I've lived it because I do, in fact, have CORI. Because of some unhealthy choices due to time, I would share my whole story. It's an open book. Because of some unhealthy choices that I made in my past, as a direct result actually to substance abuse, domestic violence. A lot of what you hear up here, I had convictions. But there came a time in my life where enough was enough. And when I went into the court system for the last time, I said to them, whatever is open, take me to it, let me take care of this. I decided at that point that not only was I a single mother and had to live a life and a role model for my children, because if I allowed history to continuously repeat itself, it was going to trickle down onto my children, and I didn't want that to happen. So I decided behind the walls of South Bay that my life was going to change, that I wasn't going to hang with the clique of people that she's talking about that use that place like a revolving door. Is that true? Yes, it is true. Is it true that somebody can be redeemed even after incarceration? Yes, I'm living proof of that. And I have a CORI, and there's more than one thing listed on that CORI. Once I was released, I decided I had a choice to go home or I had a choice to go into treatment even further. Yes, there are mental health issues that need to be addressed. Yes, substance abuse is it's a disease, it's a sickness. And if it's not treated, it runs rampant. It destroys families, it destroys lives. It doesn't just affect the addict, it affects the family as a whole. I decided to go further into treatment. And when I went into treatment, I surrounded myself with positive people that could direct me in the paths to go. I believe in God. Because you know what? In South Bay, in a 3-woman cell, he made sure that I was there by myself so that I could spend time with him and get to know him and let him direct my path. And that's what I decided to do. As a result of that, when the doors were closed in my face many a times, I said, God, that it wasn't the one for me. Let me keep on moving because you gave me the ability to give me 2 legs that I can walk with. Let me keep on moving. When another door was closed in my face, Lord, that may not be for me. And that's the 1 week that you're talking about, the 3 weeks that you're talking about, the year that you're talking about. But one day, he said, this is for you. And I didn't want to go to that interview. I ain't going there. I don't feel like being Bobby. It's just a career fair and they keep closing doors. And I was in a treatment program where my counselor said to me, either you go or you're going to have a consequence and you're not going to like it. Oh, well, I guess I better get up and go. That's the job that called me. That's the place that took a risk on me. That's the place that said, you know what, I see something in her. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not willing to take that big a risk, but I'll let her clean my rooms. Today, I manage the department that cleans the rooms. Because somebody opened the door for me. I have to look back at my sisters and brothers, whether they're black, white, Latino, who are coming from where I came from, and have to be willing to take a risk on them. To this day, even holding this position for going into 5 years, housing still says to me, you did this in 1997, so we're not going to let you live in our house. So what if you can almost pay, well, I can't say almost. So what if you can pay market rent? We still don't want you in our house. Not only do they say that to me about housing, but they want CORIs on children from age 12 to 13. So if your child who's age 14 has a juvenile offense, what are you supposed to do? Put your child out and move out? What parent is realistically going to do that? You're asking me to choose whether I love my child enough to hold on to them, the little grip that I have, to assure that they don't end up visiting, I'm sorry, Sheriff Cabral, your institution. That they go on to school, that they see that despite my CORI for the longest time has attempted, because I can't say that it doesn't, because I don't allow it to anymore, has attempted to dictate who I am and where I should go in life. I say that I refuse to allow it to dictate anymore where I go, who I can hold. I hold my head up high with pride today. When I walked in and I saw Sheriff Cabral, I wasn't afraid to say, thank you for the things that you offered in your institution, because when I was there, what does an addict look like? So when I'm walking down the street, or when I'm rubbing elbows, and I need to say that I work for a 5-star hotel that is based out of India, that sells rooms from the rate of $700 to $4,500 a night. That's who I am employed by. So the people that I rub elbows with, they don't say, there go Carolina, the ex-addict. She used to be in South Bay, and she used to use drugs, and her boyfriend used to be. No. They say, good morning, Mrs. Shampoo, how are you? And I say, good morning, and how are you? But somebody somewhere had to take a risk. Still, after 7, 8 years, my CORI still tries to knock on my door. And you know what? I close it. You say I can't seal my record, that's okay. I may not be able to seal it. And you may say, Carolina, this is what's on your CORI, and these are your things you did in 2000. Well, let me tell you about what I'm doing now. Let me tell you about the things that I did during my incarceration, the programs that were offered to me during my incarceration, what I did once I left those prison walls, what I am still doing today. Who better to help me to keep my children from making the same mistakes than me, who's actually lived it? You're telling me that people who've actually been in jail can't work with the youths today? Do you think they can relate to someone who hasn't actually been there? There needs to be change. There definitely needs to be change. And if I have made the slightest bit, made somebody think about a number they can call, somebody they can say something to, that can move it a little bit further than to me giving up my 2 hours of work to be here, Because I left my job. I had somebody pick me up. I ran down here and I got to go back to work. But that's okay. This is important to me because this is what saved my life and which continues to allow me to live today drug-free, happy, and be able to stand up and be a woman of dignity and pride. So thank you.
Juvenile record issues. I'd like to. They let me to talk now.
And so
if you
now
could say 2 minutes.
there's an opportunity. You've heard many different perspectives here. You've heard about the need to be balanced. You heard about the issues around thinking about what it does to employment, around housing, around what it does to young men's lives. And I'm interested in kind of hearing what's on your mind. What are you thinking about as you see this? And I want to invite you to come to the microphones that are here, and you can either address directly a question to the panelists or make a comment as appropriate.
Hi, Alvita Hines invited me to speak about the juvenile records issues, and I'm very glad Ms. Shaw-Boyd raised them. I'm very disturbed at how often they're excluded from discussion of CORI reform. They were excluded in the executive order that was given to Governor Patrick. They're excluded in a lot of the discussion of reform, and it's hurting our children. It's not just hurting our children, though. It's hurting our parents. So if you would permit me, Alvita, I hope I'm not getting you in trouble, said that I might speak 2 or 3 minutes to this issue. And because no one's listening, but there may be some pediatricians here or nurses here who work with children, it's very important to hear this, if you don't mind. Life in the urban areas where most of our children are being arrested is a gauntlet. Youth are either running between police, who just are terribly disrespectful and often harshly punitive of youth for no apparent reason, are on one side, youth who are very aggressive are on the other side, and the temptations of joining groups who protect themselves aggressively is high for many youth. Aggression, as we know, is a survival coping mechanism for many, many kids. The hostility of the police makes it hard to believe that authority is any better than many of the groups that youth join to protect themselves. Police do not give kids in urban areas like Boston or Springfield the benefit of the doubt. They give them no respect. They will throw them up against a wall, pat frisk them for no apparent reason except you fit the description, which almost all kids fit. You're wearing a white t-shirt and baggy shorts. They make them drop their pants in Springfield. They touch them inappropriately to humiliate them and intimidate them. And now the presence of police in every public school is legendary. So what you and I would have called a fight and had detention for it, those of you who are my age or older, now we're seeing children getting arrested, suspended, and expelled from school. The highest youth unemployment rate ever documented in the United States is this summer. The question is, what are we doing about it? The way youth react to this level of policing is incredibly normal and psychologically normal, I would say, but completely antithetical to their interests. Violence begets violence, as we know, but bleakness and a lack of hope also begets the notion that there's nothing to lose. Youth respond to officers frequently with a healthy level of defensiveness, like saying, you can't talk to me like that. You better go and get some crime instead of just messing with me, right? Like Mr. Woodman said a couple of weeks ago and got beaten up for. When this happens to kids, you should know they get arrested for the charge of public disorder, okay? And that stays on their record. Once you get arraigned in court, a juvenile's record begins. And white youth are arraigned in court much less than black youth are when we had the statistics, which now we cannot get anymore from DAs, the courts, or the Department of Probation. Their lack of hope leads to a lack of investment in themselves, a lack of belief that education will ever truly mean something like getting out of the situation. These factors combined create terrible stress in children, which leads them to do things like smoke pot, which leads them to get arrested. Now, the arrest for public disorder, the arrest for trespass on Boston Housing Authority property, being kept in detention, which is the greatest predictor of reoffending, being kept in an alternative lockup, which is not even certified as a proper place to put children in Massachusetts because it is a truck warehouse without heating. All these things are done to children who don't understand what's happening to them. Their parents don't understand. They don't understand what's happening to their parents. But when a child goes to juvenile court, there are very few judges or defenders who will explain to the child that they've been adjudicated, not convicted. So when the child fills out an employment form after what they've been experiencing, even if they've been adjudicated non-delinquent, they'll write, yeah, I've been convicted, because they don't understand what's happened to them in the court system. And there's a lot that would explain why they wouldn't understand, because when they appear in court from detention in 2008, the state of Massachusetts is still shackling a child by God. The theory of joint venture is one of the number one reasons children get arrested, because they're with a group. Two members of the group do something, but two others who are there get arrested too, because the police cast the net wide. And that's another way of understanding snitching. Now, what kids are seeing is a system which looks like an adult system. Neither the judges or defenders, as I say, clarify what's going on very well. And the widespread confusion that results from having a record is enormous. So let me tell you the story that broke my heart. I was trying to explain how the CORI system works to kids in a game I play with them called Juvenile Justice Jeopardy. And I will leave my cards up there in case you want me to play it with a group of your kids. And when I was explaining how a record gets created for a juvenile, a little boy, a tiny little boy, 6th grader, maybe 50 pounds, 60 pounds, said, "Excuse me, miss, when I die, will my CORI go on my death certificate?" And I said, "No, sweetheart, it won't. But I will tell you that CORIs on juveniles should be released only to daycare centers, only to nursing homes, only to summer camps." And yet I had a probation officer who really dislikes me call me in utter fury, because a young woman, 28 years old, an RN, who was up for a position of nurse manager, was told that unless her record for when she was 16 and did 3 months probation for shoplifting could be cleared, she was not going to become a nurse manager. And I ask you, you know medical facilities may not access juvenile records, and yet they get them. You know medical application forms say you do not have to disclose your adjudications, and yet they get them. And so when I go to Pittsfield, where the biggest employer is the Berkshire Medical Center and no one can get jobs, I ask you, could you do something, please? I also ask you this because you have to know that fighting is a felony. Not only does it get you arrested now if you do it in school, but it's assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and everyone here is wearing a dangerous weapon, shoes. So I often tell kids, take your shoes off before you get in a fight, because I want to reduce this from a felony charge, but that was a joke. But a lot of them are not going to stop to take their shoes off.
I'm going to ask you to just wrap up again,
It's going to be very hard, because I will try, but I'm not inclined to let this issue be dropped. I will go quickly, but if you wanted to marginalize a group of people, you couldn't do it better this way. The Boston Housing Authority took 1 year to adhere to the law, and as Ms. Shaw-Boyd said, there is still the presumption that on applications that Boston Housing Authority may ask for a juvenile's record, this is illegal. It's illegal under the executive order. It takes 3 years to seal a juvenile's record. So once all the proceedings are done and a juvenile is not again arrested, they have to find an attorney. Their parent has to remember to look for one 3 years later. A lot of kids don't. We have to increase awareness, because kids think, for instance, when you get a Boston Housing Authority trespass notice, it's a CORI, and you may not be helped. But I'll tell you, when a kid gets arrested in Boston, the Boston Police Department shares the arrest information with the Boston Housing Authority police, and sometimes within a week, a family gets an eviction notice, and they're told, you either evict or you get your child off your lease. This is repetitive experience for us, and we have been unable to stop this. Finally, I think we need to change CORI legislation for children. Until 2002, we could seal and purge our records. Now we can only seal. As Senator Wilkerson says, the state has failed to do what would be logical in these cases. It has failed to indemnify employers to take this risk, and that ought to be one of our major pushes. I want to end by saying something that a Dutch philosopher wrote in 1635. He said, "Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it certainly enlarges the future." I urge you to consider juveniles' plight in these situations and help me take action to change this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if the panel wants to respond to her remarks. It seems that you might want to do a part 2 for this project that would focus on juvenile justice and CORI reform.
Clearly, the idea of doing part 2 is something that we're thinking about as well. It's an incredibly large issue. But before we hear from you, you've raised the important issue around juvenile issues relating to CORIs. Thank you. Are there comments from our group here?
Ought to be.
Okay. We know that it's an important issue, and we acknowledge that and appreciate that comment. Let's hear from you.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for the powerful presentation. I'm Kelly Chun, the social marketer dealing with health disparities. I wanted to ask a question about the reentry process, because it seems to me how an ex-prisoner reenters the system and how they're prepared might have a lot to do with how they're positioned to make a better life. And I think Caroletta alluded to this when she talked about taking advantage of many of the programs that were available in the prison system. So I'm wondering if any of the panelists can address the importance of reentry and how perhaps it can be made more a part of the system, the housing, employment, health, and so forth.
Thoughts on this issue? Sheriff?
Sure. The essential components of any good reentry program, and we have 4 different kinds of programs coming out of South Bay, are taking the information that you have from your initial intake. Really reentry, we always say, the sheriffs say anyway, reentry starts at day 1. So from your first day in, we're doing a level service inventory to find out what your drug abuse history is, what your educational history is, your job history, what your other deficits may very well be. And during the time that you're actually serving the bulk of your sentence, we're trying through our programming to address those issues. We've got you in the substance abuse program, maybe you're getting your GED, or you're in some other program that addresses one of the other deficits. In pre-release is when a formal reentry program starts, and that has got to be, and almost always is, a partnership between the institution at the Sheriff's Department and a variety of community partners. I'll give you one example. Our Community Reentry for Women program, which we call CREW, is a partnership between us, the South End Community Health Center, and Project Place. Project Place because it deals with housing and it deals with jobs, and the South End Community Health Center because we are essentially the primary care physician for people who come to jail and they don't have any relationships with doctors. And we're trying to kind of start that while they're still in custody as they're moving through the reentry process, teaching them life skills, teaching them job skills. One of the great parts of this program, and it's essential, and it's not a part of enough programs because usually of funding issues, but part of this program is 2 years follow-up and aftercare. The follow-up and aftercare, you know, when you're doing time, as difficult as it might be to do time, you're in a structured environment and you're doing programs, it's easy to hew to the line because that's what you're doing every single day. The hard part is when you get out because you go home. And depending on what you go home to, you have either the same influences or you have an increased sense of hopelessness because of what's around you. You've got to have the follow-up and the aftercare, and the programs have to be local. People have to be able to get on a bus, get to Strive, to go to their job, education program. They have to be able to do that. So what you'll find largely is reentry is the county sheriffs do it. Every single sheriff, all of the sheriffs got together a year and a half ago and agreed that we would all provide those 3 basics in reentry. And we all do different things depending on where we are. So I don't have a lot of space. There are sheriffs that have a lot of land, so they have programs that are, geared more to the space that they have. But it's an absolutely integral part of certainly any county sentence, and I think the DOC, the state prison, is trying to work on it now, but people do much longer sentences in state prison. It's an essential part of any county sentence. I think one of my issues with it is, while I think it's absolutely necessary, I love the fact that I'm able to do it. I take money from other parts of my budget that I probably shouldn't, and I put it into programs because that's my way of keeping the people in the community safe, and it's also my way of keeping people out of my institution. We've got to start channeling more energy, if not money. I think the money would be good too, but everybody always says there isn't any. People, half of my population, they're dropouts. Over 50% of the 1,800 men and women who are, and it's mostly men, who are at South Bay right now, didn't pass 8th grade. And there are mental illnesses and there are learning disabilities, but in many cases, it is a fundamental issue of education not being valued in the home. So that when a child comes home, if nobody's saying, did you do your homework? And if people aren't engaged in parent-teacher conferences and aren't going to their legislators and saying, my school doesn't have up-to-date books, my kid doesn't have a computer in school, I want you to work on that, it's not going to happen. And $30,000 a year is a lot of money to pay for a job training program, and that's how much it costs me to incarcerate somebody for a year. And that's where people are getting their job training programs. I have one program that's certified by the state as a certified apprenticeship program, because what we do in the course of the reentry program is exactly what someone would have to pay for outside of our institution. As long as you get through that program, it's as though you've done a certified apprenticeship program. That's incredibly expensive. Why isn't there more of that available before people get to this point, and more of an emphasis? I mean, that's the problem. I'd love to be put out of business. Trust me, I can find another job. I have other skills. That's not a problem. I think with the amount of money that we're putting into this, and it's such a combination of factors, it's absolutely disastrous in many ways. Much of it has to do with the attitude of the people who are actually doing time, because I'm sure, as Carletta referred to, when I say I've got a core of people that really want to do well and I'm helping them do well, that's absolutely true. There are a bunch of people who think they can do that bid standing on their head, and they're not there yet, and they won't be there until they're much closer to their 30s than their 20s. And by then, all the other people have been working all this time. You haven't. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot more to this than the reform of a system. While that may be necessary, there's a lot more to this.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Hannibal Ferrer, Senior. I'm an ex-offender. I ain't been in jail in 20 years. I'm an author. Thank you for buying my book, Sheriff.
You're very welcome.
I'm a playwright.
I enjoy your reading, by the way.
I'm a playwright. I'm also the founder of the Stanley Jones Clean Slate Project. Stanley Jones Clean Slate Project is a community-based think tank, ex-offender organization that's solution-driven. We're in leadership around CORI change. I'm impressed with your panel. I'm glad to see all these people in here. I wish you would come to our meetings. What I want to talk about today is that you're talking about programs, and I'm talking about the economy. Everybody knows about the economy, and you know it's getting cut back. And when it gets cut back, program money gets cut back. So the Stanley Jones Clean Slate Project, along with Northeastern University School of Law Office Project, for the last 4 years has been working to power and educate the community around the importance of CORI change, that ex-offenders are an overlooked resource in the community. And we're trying to create our own housing model, housing service model, operated by qualified ex-offenders. People have a tendency to help you when they see you trying to help yourself. I'm not trying to get my CORI, my record sealed. I'm not ashamed of what happened to me when I was an addict. That does not define my life. My record does not define my life. What I've done with those mistakes to change my life is what they need to look at. I served my country for 6 years with honor during Vietnam. My record will not say anything about that. I sat on the Boston Foundation Advisory Board around the CORI for the governor. The political solutions for CORI will not come. CORI reform is a moral issue. It deals with forgiveness. You're not going to find that in the legislature. He said 3,000 people walked down through our community, circled the State House, while they crowded us downstairs in that little old room in the State House. I was there. I sweated in there, and it didn't change anything. We have to change ourselves. And you heard the sheriff talk about education. I'm going to wrap up with this. It was 15,000 Boston Public School students last year in summer school. Half of them were there because they couldn't read. My books are readability level of 4th and 5th grade through the help of Generations Incorporated. Our 9th grade kids are reading on the 4th grade level. If our kids cannot read, they cannot compete. And if they cannot compete, they're going to cheat and they're going to go to jail. So 4 years from now, you have 60,000 students that went to summer school. And out of those 60,000, let's take a quarter of them, which would be 15,000 that are going right into the court system. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your experiences and your information. I'm still processing that powerful testimony of Carlotta's, and it's an emotional time, and I'm very proud of you. And this is the type of citizens that we want to keep turning out, so we cannot let them down. We have to continue to support this effort, and we begin with CORI reform. My name is Dorotea Manuela, and I am the chair of the New Mission High School Governing Board. And I just want to make a very short comment and ask a question in reference to a segment of our population in the community that hasn't been mentioned that should be part of the CORI reform. So I'm not trying to rewrite what we have now because I passionately support it. I would just like to recommend that as we change it, that we add this population that is invisible and that is currently being criminalized, and that is the immigrant population. Right now, they're being criminalized because we don't all understand what the issues are, and I don't pretend that I'm going to do it here either. But the CORIs that come up when they do those massive raids and they bring people in, many of the people are documented, and they're just like you and I. We're working, and those CORIs, they could be misdemeanors. And because of the institutionalized racism and discrimination, these very CORIs are used to revoke and to deny immigration status to people that are here and that are documented. So I would like to know if there's any data available that we can study that will tell us the numbers of the immigrant workers and the immigrants that are caught up into this system and how the CORI is being used to deny them housing, education, job, employment, just like the rest of us.
Thank you. Any issues, anyone familiar around this issue around immigrants and to speak to the issue of immigrants and CORI?
The only thing I would offer is on the housing side, I know that there are immigrants, legal and illegal immigrants in the public housing system, and we are fairly diligent in trying to defend their rights to stay there. It's really hard to stereotype these populations because you may have a parent who entered the country illegally but has been here working productively, paying taxes for years, and the children are all legal. And what are you going to do? Break up families? I just think that people come into the country in a number of different ways. And once you're here, I think you just got to keep moving. Got to keep getting up and trying to do the best you can. So the only thing I just wanted to do is just assure you, at least on the public housing side, there is not a sense of a criminalization of immigrants of whatever status on that side. I frankly am not up to date on what's happening on the private market side, how the private market is screening, or whether they're diligent in that arena or not. I think if it shows up as a CORI issue, then I think you're right. Then I think people continually get caught on housing applications if there's a CORI for whatever reason, because many times the property managers don't stop to even evaluate what the CORI's even got in it. They just see if there is one, it's just a lot easier to just move to the next applicant.
Thank you. The important piece here is that we are identifying any number of populations that are impacted by this, and certainly we've heard the issues around juveniles and now the issues around immigrants as well.
My name is Angina Lithcott, and it's been 30 years since I had a job between a degree in clinical social work and a degree in public health. When I used to group heroin addicts, and I used to work for a program in Los Angeles that was for, called Kicks Bricks, that were for people who had just been released from incarceration and help them get back into the community. And what I'm not understanding, and I'm new to the Boston area, so it just may be my ignorance, but what I'm not understanding in a country where people are innocent until proven guilty is, why is the data mixed up? Why is it that people that are accused of crimes is mixed up with people that have been found guilty of crimes? And why is it that there is such a wide swatch of people that have access to such personal information that normally I would see as confidential? I can imagine a few situations in which people would need to have access, and I understand that there's recidivism, but I'm not understanding why people who are accused are in the same database as people that are found guilty, why that's even in the database, why the database doesn't have different levels of access. I'm just not understanding that. Can somebody help me with that?
Angina, you have perhaps put your finger on the crux of the issue around the need for reform and the issue of availability, the issues of the appropriateness of the data. And I'm wondering if there's someone on the panel who might want to actually address kind of the crux of the issues that Dean Lithcott has just identified.
Well, I can give you a little bit of my understanding of the history of it. I don't think that criminal offender record information was ever, in its original incarnation, envisioned to be available the way it's available now. It was supposed to only be available for the people who would need it inside of a courtroom or police officers, always in the context of a criminal case. And it's almost a classic case of closing the barn door after the horse has run out and is now in another state. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to, is that, you know, it's a combination of things. There were, I am sure, and I do remember, I was talking to Wayne about it earlier, I remember reading a specific case involving a lawsuit where a landlord was sued because he had rented out an apartment to a man who claimed to be a handyman. The top floor apartment had a family with a 4-year-old little girl in it. This man said he was a handyman. He, in exchange for doing work around the house and working in all of the apartments, he didn't have to pay rent. It turned out he was violent and a sex offender, and he raped and murdered the little girl, and the family sued the landlord and said, how could you have rented to this person? How come you didn't ask him? How come you didn't know? And there were, I'm sure, a series of cases like that involved housing and employment and everything, you name it, where someone was ultimately injured by someone who committed a crime, and there was a lawsuit that followed. That's almost exactly how every single law is developed. Hard cases make bad law. They say that for a reason, because you have a visceral reaction to the idea of a child being raped and murdered, and sometimes you put things in place that are immediately designed to impact that, but aren't comprehensive enough or thoughtful enough to envision all of the potential consequences of giving information. One of the most dangerous things you can do to a human being is give them knowledge. If they don't know how to use it, you're in trouble. And so that's what all of this is about now. But the system itself is a continuum. When you look at someone's criminal record, and it has the person's name, their identifying information, it gives you the charge. It gives you the date the person was arraigned on the charge, the date it was continued to. If the person defaulted, there's an abbreviation for the default. It tells you the entire life of that criminal charge, up to and including the conclusion of it, whether it's a conviction, a dismissal, or some other resolution. And so it's one of those, they've always kept the information like this. That's simple. And I think what they envision currently is that they were going to have to, of necessity, start separating out and build a database and pay the millions of dollars that it's going to take probably to do that. But they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to separate the information out because not everybody's entitled to it.
Thank you, Sheriff. And Gina, I appreciate you raising that issue. As I spoke to our panelists earlier and told them that we needed to be brief and that I would bringing out the hook, I have just been given the hook. So I'm going to ask our last speaker to actually be very brief, please.
Okay, I have a very brief question. I just want to say the panel has been really fascinating, and I really appreciate the testimony of both Hannibal and Carletta. And this is not meant to be a disrespectful question in any way, and the little bit of history is actually very helpful, but why can't we just have the reports in language that people can understand? Why do they have to be in codes?
Because it would literally be, if we wrote out continued until, defaulted, probation, if you think people are getting hit now with a series of things that may not have been resolved, if we had to actually write it out so that people would really understand what, that means writing out the charge too. You know, it wouldn't be okay to have ASSLT/W/INTMUR, assault with intent to murder. You'd have to write it out. I mean, I'm sure it's an economy of scale. It's a printout, it's a computer program, and like I say, I have to believe it was never, no one ever thought, and we pay people to think this way, but they don't necessarily. Nobody ever thought that we would reach this point where now, what do we do with all this? Right, and you're taught to read it. Right, has no idea what they're looking at.
You have perhaps, though, hit on one of the most important issues, not only in this one, but in every issue that we deal with. In the issue of health care, in the issue of everything. Can you make the language simple enough for all of us to be able to understand it? What an incredibly important thing. I'd like to first, before we say goodbye to our panelists, I'm going to invite Professor Judith Bernstein to actually come and kind of wrap this all up for us. But as she's coming, I would appreciate if you would give a big applause to our panelists for being incredibly informative.
I just got an impossible task to wrap this all up for all of us. But what I would like to do is to step back for a minute and just think about the different perspectives that we've heard today, because we've heard a lot of different points of view and approaches put forward. We can think about CORI repair, which would be the narrowest perspective for approaching doing something about the problem, looking at it from a point of view of public safety. We want to fix some of the worst injustices in the system. That I see as being a lose-lose approach, because what we would lose would be the opportunity to, as a society, enjoy the benefit and the productivity and the work and the richness of experience and the just plumb grit and determination and resilience of people who have survived coming out of those experiences, turned their lives around, and really are ready to make a contribution to society. And I would like to say that this is not just about Caroletta Boyd Shaw, although what she had to say was just so profoundly moving, because there are so many people like her, and I've had the privilege of working with so many people like her. Project Assert over in the emergency department at Boston Medical Center consists of health promotion advocates who are hired from the community to work in the emergency department under very difficult conditions and to really be with patients through all of the issues that they're struggling with. 4 out of the 6 people who work in that program have CORIs, and I had to fight like hell to make sure they got hired. But that was a requirement for the job. They have gone through that experience and gotten something out of it, and they've been there for 15 years, serving people and serving the institution. This is not an unusual set of circumstances. The second approach that I think we've heard today would be one that would recommend CORI reform. And that would be one that comes from a justice perspective, looking at who's most disadvantaged or most discriminated against by the issues around CORI. And we've heard about the unbalance in the way that CORI comes down, particularly on young black men. It also comes down that way on women as well. In the justice system, in the last quarter century, there's been a 728% increase in the number of women incarcerated. And that's a 231% increase for white women and an 828% increase for African American women. So there are real injustices and they need to be corrected. But what we really would benefit most from, that's a sort of win-lose because it pits competing interests against each other, what we most would benefit from would be a win-win approach. And I think that's the public health approach, because it looks, if you think about the World Health Organization definition, at healthy individuals, both physical, mental, and social health,
living in healthy families and healthy communities. And the Institute of Medicine says that it's our job as public health professionals to ensure the capacity for people to do that, to live healthy lives in healthy communities. That's the win-win approach. And that's the approach that would allow every individual to make the greatest contribution. It would allow the development of a strong and healthy public workforce, and particularly in healthcare, where the demands are going to be so enormous. It would allow us to take advantage of everything that society has to offer, both for individuals and for ourselves in the communities that we live in. And so as we leave here, I would like us all to be thinking about how we could contribute to this process, to think about which are the right frameworks, because getting the right programs and the right policies often depends on how you define the problem and then what you do with it. And you've had a lot of information today from a lot of different people to help you do that. And we have lists outside of people who participated today. We're hoping that we'll be able to come back to many of you. Those of you who are already activists or involved, some of you are new to the issue and perhaps would like to join in with people who are trying to do something to change the way the CORI is practiced in Massachusetts and nationally. So thank you very much for coming.